Welcome back to On the Same Page. We are on Daf Chaf Vav Amud Beis 26b of Maseches Kiddushin, 3 lines from the bottom of the page, where the Gemara says Tashma. The Gemara is discussing a question. The question is, we learned that there are certain types of kinyanim, certain types of modes of acquisition that work for land that don't work for metaltalin, for movable objects. And we learned in the Mishnah that although those kinyanim, those modes of acquisition, don't work for metaltalin on their own, but if one is already acquiring a piece of land using one of these ways, so one of the ways is kesef, with cash, that by handing over money, that actually affects the transaction when the money exchanges hands, as opposed to normally with metaltalin, when you give the money, the object doesn't become yours until you actually pull the object towards you. But when you're buying land, it does. And once you're doing it with land, you can acquire the metaltalin alongside it, along with it. So the Gemara's question was, do those metaltalin, do those objects need to be on the piece of land that you're acquiring? Or could they be somewhere else? And still, when you acquire the land, you can acquire those objects along with it. So the Gemara tried to bring various proofs, and so far the question remains. So the Gemara picks up now 3 lines from the bottom, Tashma. Come and listen. We have a Brisa, Maisa b'Rabban Gamliel u'Zakenim. There was a story with Rabban Gamliel and the elders, Shahayu Ba'im B'Sfina. They were traveling by boat, and Rabban Gamliel remembered, he realized that back at home there's some produce that he hasn't separated Meiser, he hasn't tithed yet. And therefore that produce is tevel, it's forbidden to be eaten. And I guess he was concerned that his family might eat from that produce. And he hadn't given them permission to take the tithe. So to take Meiser. So Amar Lahem Rabban Gamliel Ezakenim. Rabban Gamliel told the elders. So before actually we see exactly what he said, there are different types of Meiser, as we've discussed in the past. There is Meiser Rishon, which is a tithe that you give to a Levi. Then there is Meiser Sheni, which is a tithe that you bring to Yerushalayim and consume it there. And then there's Meiser Ani, a tithe that goes to the poor. So Meiser Rishon is in effect every year of Shemitah, except for during the actual Shemitah year, so years 1 through 6. Meiser Sheni is in effect year 1 and 2, but not year 3, and then year 4 and 5, but not year 6. And Meiser Ani is in effect on those off years, so year 3 and year 6. So this seemingly was either year 3 or year 6, so he was required to take Meiser Rishon, separate the first tithe to give to a Levi, and separate another tithe to give to the poor. So he said as follows, he told the Zakenim, he told the elders, Isur Shani Asid Lamod, the tithe that I will in the future measure out, Nasun lo Yehoshua. I'm giving it to Yehoshua, Rabbi Yehoshua ben Chananya, who I think was with him. Umekomo muskarlo, and I will rent him the space where that tithe sits. And Rabbi Yehoshua ben Chananya was a Levi, and so he could give. So Rabbi Gamliel could give his Meiser Rishon to Rabbi Yehoshua, but he didn't have the Meiser here for Rabbi Yehoshua to acquire it. So what did he do? He rented him the space, and Rabbi Yehoshua gave him money. And in that acquisition of that space, when he acquired that piece of land where the Meiser was sitting, seemingly that seems to be what he's doing. He says Mekomo, the place where it's sitting. When he acquired the land, that spot, in the storehouse or whatever it was. Through that acquisition of the land, he would acquire the Meiser also. So, although he hadn't actually separated it out literally, but he had, I guess, designated a spot, and it's a little complicated exactly how it works, but for our purposes, that can work according to him. So, that's what he did. Now, that was in terms of the Meiser Rishon. What about the Meiser Ani, which goes to the poor? He said, "V'isur acher shani asid lamod," and another tenth that I will in the future measure out. Nasun lo Akiva ben Yosef. I give that to Akiva ben Yosef. That's Rabbi Akiva. Kadesh Yizke Bo La'aniyim, in order that he acquire it on behalf of the poor. Rabbi Akiva, at one point in his life, was poor. At this point, he was not. So he could not give the actual Meiser Ani to Rabbi Akiva, but he had Rabbi Akiva acquire it on behalf of the poor. And again he said, Umekomo muskerlo, and I will rent you the space on which the Meiser sits. And by Rabbi Akiva giving him money to acquire that space, he could at the same time acquire the Meiser. So says the Gemara, Shma Mina, we see from here, but Inan Siburim, but we require that the Meiser be sitting on the spot, because otherwise, why did he specifically rent the space where the Meiser was sitting to each of these? To Rabbi Yoshua, he said, I'm going to give you the Meiser, and the way you're going to acquire is I'm going to rent you the space that the Meiser is sitting on. He said the same thing to Rabbi Akiva. Says the Gemara, you see from here that in order to acquire metaltaling, movable objects, in this case the Meiser, alongside land, it has to be on that piece of land. So says the Gemara, not necessarily. It's not necessarily that he stipulated the land upon which the Meiser sits because that's required. Rather, maybe Shani Hasa, maybe that's different. He didn't want to trouble them. If he would grant them Meiser that was not on land that they owned or rented, then they would have to deal with transporting it, until it was given out or consumed. So that would be an inconvenience to them. This was just out of convenience. He said, I'm giving you this Meiser, and now he had to give them some piece of land in order for them to acquire the Meiser alongside it, because the acquisition that would work for Meiser, would require them to be present with the Meiser, and they're not there. So he allowed them to give him money for the land, and alongside that they would acquire the Meiser, and he really could have done it with any piece of land, but he gave them specifically the land that the Meiser was sitting on, because that would be more convenient for them. Then they have a place in which to keep it, but not because it has to be sitting on that piece of land. So again, we don't have any proof either way. We're not sure why he did it. Did he do it because he had to, or did he do it out of convenience? There's no proof from the story one way or another. The Gemara continues, it says, Tashma, come and listen. De'amar Rava bar Yitzchak amar Rav. Rava bar Yitzchak said in the name of Rav, Shnei Shtarasein. There's two scenarios that could come up, probably more, but in terms of acquiring a field through, not through a star, but with a star, with a document, as a proof. So we'll see what he means. So he says, if a person says to a third party, Zachu b'sadezu leploni, please acquire this field on behalf of Ploni, on behalf of someone else. V'kasvu lo es hashtar, and also write a shtar, write a document that as a proof, write a shtar matana, I guess, a document that proves that the field was given to so and so. I guess it could be in the case of a sale. It's a case where he's asking somebody to perform the act of acquisition on behalf of a third person. But he says, and write a proof, write a shtar, a document that proves it. So the Brisa says, it's a Brisa, it's a statement. It says, Choser b'shtar ve'eno choser b'sadeh. He's allowed to retract his instruction to write the document as proof. However, he may not retract on the acquisition. I assume that's once the acquisition was already made. Once the acquisition was made, he may not retract. Let me just think about that for a second. Yeah, I'm not totally sure if this is saying specifically after he's already acquiring on the guy's behalf, or maybe even before, once the instruction has been made. I'm not sure why he wouldn't be able to take it back at that point. But fine. So it says that he's allowed to retract on the shtar. He could say, actually, I don't want him to have a proof that I gave it to him. It's his, but I'm not going to let him have a proof. That he's allowed to do. However, ve'eno chozer b'sada, he can't take back the giving of the field. Again, I think once the second person has acquired it on behalf of the third person. But if he says al manas shetichtavu lo es ashtar, but if he says you acquire this for him, for another person, on condition that you write a document as proof, so then it's dependent on the document. So then chozer bein b'shtar bein b'sada. If he hasn't actually written the document, even if he's done some kind of acquisition, but the document isn't written, so the acquisition isn't fulfilled yet. So therefore, the giver or the seller, whatever he's doing here, can still retract on both. So you actually don't write a document, and I don't want it to be his. Rav Chia bar Avin amar Rav Huna. Rav Chia bar Avin says the name of Rav Huna, Shlosha Shtar, saying there's a third case where we can talk about a document involving a sale as a proof. Trei Hadamran. The first two are the ones that we already mentioned, but there's a third scenario. Idach, another one is Im Kadam Mocher V'Kasav Oles Shtar. What if the seller wrote a document that says that he sold the field to so-and-so, but he hasn't actually yet sold the field. He just prepared the document. And that's okay, as we learned, that it's permitted to write up a document of sale for the seller, even though the buyer's not there yet. He's not there, you're allowed to write this, as if the seller had sold the field, or whatever item, to the buyer. It's okay to write that and give it to the seller. You can't write it for the buyer because he didn't actually buy it yet. But for the seller, you can give him a document, a contract that says that he sold the field. So what about this? So this guy, that means that he could also write it himself. So the seller wrote himself a document that says that he sold the field. So now says Rav Huna, Kivon shehichzik imo bekarka, nikne shtar bekol makom shehu. If now that buyer performs an act of chazaka, an act that shows proof of ownership, which is one of the ways in which you can acquire a field. So the second guy, the buyer, doesn't act. Now he's not holding the shtar, the document that proves that he acquired it. That the seller wrote, but it's somewhere else. So says Rav Huna, the buyer, when he acquires the field, he automatically can acquire the document along with it. Now the document is metaltaling, it's a movable object. The field he can acquire with chazaka. And he's agav, alongside acquiring the field, along with it he's acquiring the document that proves that he bought the field. So you see, says the Gemara, Shma mina, lo ba'inan tziburim ba. We don't require that the items be piled up in the field, because in this case, the document that he's acquiring along with the field is not on the field. So it's a proof that it doesn't have to be there. So the Gemara says, no, you can't prove from there. Shani shtar de'afsira de'arahu. It says it's different. A shtar, a document, is different. It's the afsira de'ara. The afsira is like the bridle or the reins of an animal. In this case, it's saying they are the reins of the field. What is that supposed to mean? So Rashi says it's like the handle. It's attached to it. Is how Rashi explains it. It's like the handle for the field. It's like the land itself. It's that which, I guess, sort of proves your rights to the land. It has an attachment to the land. And maybe that's very unique for a shtar, a document that proves a sale of land can be acquired along with land, even if it's not on the land. But other things which are not attached to the land in the same way, they are just items, then they're not here, perhaps you can't acquire them along with the land. Perhaps they have to be on the land in order to acquire them. So from the fact that you could acquire the document that proves the sale of the land along with the land, even though it's not on the land, does not prove that you could acquire other objects along with the land if they are not on the land. So there seems to be no proof. However, the Gemara says, but really there is, because v'ha'ala katani, but we taught regarding this very case, zuhi sheshoninu, this is, as we taught, nechasim she'en la'hem achrayus niktim im nechasim she'esh la'hem achrayus. There was a comment made regarding this case that said, this is exactly what we learned, that you can acquire nechasim she'en la'hem achrayus, property that doesn't have responsibility with it, which is our term for metaltalin, movable objects. You can acquire them with property that does have responsibility, does have a lien, meaning land. B'kasef, b'shar, b'chazaka, with money, with a document, or with a chazaka. So the Gemara says, actually there's a brisa, I guess, there was a statement that was made that says that this case of acquiring the document along with the land, that's a great example, it says, of acquiring metaltalin along with land. So this statement is really saying it's not unique, this case. It's not a special case. There's a statement that sums it up as like, this is the quintessential case, this is a great example of it. So it seems to imply there's nothing unique about it, there's nothing different about it. There's no special, thing that a piece of a document that proves the sale of land is like the handle of the land, it's attached somehow. There's no such thing, because there's a statement that was made that says that this is a great classic case of acquiring metaltalin, movable objects, along with the field. So it seems to be just a normal case, and yet, even though it's not on the field itself, he was able to acquire that document. Says the Gemara, Shma Mina, we learn from here, Lo ba'inan siburim ba, we do not require that the items be on the land, piled up on the land. Shma Mina, it concludes, we can learn from here. So the Gemara actually comes to a conclusion, and the conclusion is that the items do not need to be on the land in order to be acquired along with the land. Okay, ask the Gemara, they posed a question still with regards to these types of acquisitions. The kinyan agav, this type of acquisition where you acquire metaltalin along with land. They asked, mi ba'inan agav olo. Do you need to explicitly state that you are acquiring it agav? You're acquiring it alongside the land. I suppose the question is like this. Do you need to say, I'm selling you this field, and agav, the field, along with the field, you're going to acquire the metaltalin, the movable objects. Do you have to say that explicitly, that it's like comes along with it? Or is it enough just to say, listen, I want to sell you a field and I want to sell you whatever, an armchair. And it's going to be $100. And cheap field. And when he pays him the money, automatically, since he was buying a field, he can acquire the armchair also. Even though they never said that it's like coming together, agav, that since it works for the field, it's going to work alongside with the armchair. So is it necessary to speak that out explicitly? That's the Gemara's question. So the Gemara says, Tashma, come and listen. Dikatani kolhani. It says, look back at all the cases that we've already talked about just now. Vilokatani agav. In any of these cases, it never says that he specifically said agav, alongside it. So for example, even in the case that we just had today, the Rabbi Gamliel said, the meiser that I'm going to separate will be yours, and the place that it's sitting on will be rented to you. He never said that it's going to function agav, that the reason why it will work is because it's working on the land, it will work on the meiser, which is the metaltalin, the movable objects. We had, last week, we talked about the story of the guy who had 100 sheep and 100 barrels, and he needed a piece of land in order to transfer it along with the land. And there he just says, he said, the tefach, by a tefach of land will go to so-and-so, and with it also sheep and barrels. But he never said that it's like agav alongside, through that kinyan you'll also acquire this. He just said, with it, I'm going to sell you both. So it seems that you don't need to actually speak it out. The Gemara says, Vivataimech, well, according to that logic that you're examining the words very carefully to try to bring a proof, Kini miktani, He also never said acquire it in these cases. He said tefach by a tefach will go to so and so. A hand's worth by a hand's worth of land will go to so and so. He never said, make an acquisition, make a kinyan. Also in the case of Rabbi Gamliel, he didn't say to Rabbi Yoshua, kini, make an act of acquisition. Now, obviously, says the Gemara, you need to tell him, you need to instruct him to make an act of acquisition. The act of acquisition will be on the land, and you'll acquire the metalton along with it, but you have to instruct the guy, acquire, make an act of acquisition. But it doesn't say that. So if you're getting so into exactly what it says, well, it doesn't say that either. Ella ad amar kini. Rather, obviously, it doesn't work unless you tell the person to acquire. So hachanami, we can say the same thing. Ad amar agav. Now it doesn't work until he says agav, even though we didn't see that he said that, but maybe we could say that he has to say it. It's obviously not going to to the exact required words. So maybe he does have to say agav, that you'll acquire the metaltaling through the acquisition of the land. So we don't really have a proof. But the Gemara still concludes, V'hilchasa, what is the halacha? Tziburim lo ba'inam. The halacha is you don't need to pile it up. Actually, it seems like the Gemara does see that as a proof. It didn't. Well, I wanted to call it a proof, actually. So the Gemara concludes, the halacha is tziburim lo ba'inam. You don't need to have the items piled on the land. They don't have to be piled there, meaning they could be somewhere else, like we learned previously. But agav ukani ba'inan. But you do need, the Gemara concludes, you do need to say agav. You do need to say that the acquisition is working through the land. You're acquiring the metaltalin through the acquisition of the land. And you also have to say kani. You have to instruct the person to make an acquisition. That is required. Okay. Ibayilahu, they asked another question. Lots of questions about how these kinyan agavs work, these side acquisitions of acquiring metaltalin along with land. Sadeh b'mecher u'metaltalin b'matanamahu. Can it work to acquire the field through a purchase and the metaltalin through a gift? In other words, you want to gift someone metaltalin. You want to gift someone some barrels, and you want to sell them a field. So can that work? Can you sell them the field, and through the transaction of the field, automatically you will gift them the metaltalin without them making a separate act of acquisition on the metaltalin, on those barrels? So the Gemara says, Tashma, come and listen. We can learn it from the story with Rabbi Gamliel, because he said to Rabbi Yoshua there, he said, Isar shani asid lamod, the tithe that I am going to measure out, Nasan Yoshua will be given to Yoshua, umekomo muskerlo, and the space that it's sitting on will be rented to him. So there, he rented out the land, and he gave a gift of the meiser. So renting is like selling. So you see that you can have separate types of acquisitions that could still work. You can rent or sell the piece of land, and agav that, gift the metaltalin to the recipient, and that works. Shema Mino, we can learn from that story that can work. Ibayilahu, they asked them another question. What about to two different people? Can you make a transaction on the field to one person, and have the movable, when he acquires that, have him acquire the movable objects on behalf of another? So the Gemara says, Tashma, come and listen. Also from that story with Rabbi Gamliel, he said to Rabbi Akiva, he said, Isar shani asid lamod nasan Akiva ben Yosef. He said, the tithe that I am going to measure out will be given to Rabbi Akiva, kidei sheyizke bo laniyim, so that he can acquire it for the poor, umekomo muskerlo, and the space will be rented to him. It sounds like he's renting the space to Rabbi Akiva, but he's giving, Rabbi Akiva is acquiring on behalf of the poor. So he's giving to the poor, Rabbi Gamliel, but he's renting the space to Rabbi Akiva, so you see that it could be to two separate people. Says the Gemara, not necessarily. My muskar lemaiser. Maybe when he said that the space is rented to him, he meant to the owners of the meiser, the owners of the tithe, not to Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva is actually going to be acquiring it, all of it, on behalf of the poor. Not just will he acquire the meiser, the produce, on behalf of the poor, but also the land that he's renting. He's not renting it for himself. He's renting it for them, maybe. So therefore, it's not to two separate people. It's not for him and for others. It's all for the poor people. Another way to understand it, and it still won't be a proof. Again, we think we have a proof because he's giving the meiser to the poor and he's renting the space to Rabbi Akiva. You see, it could work to two separate people. So the first answer is no, there's no proof because he's really renting the space to the poor. The second answer is no, just this is different. It's true, it's to two different people, but it's different here. You can't bring a proof to anything from here. Rabbi Akiva is different. Diyad aniyam hava. He was the hand of the poor. He represented the poor here. So although they are renting the space to him and giving the metaltal and the meiser to the poor, but this is different because Rabbi Akiva is the yadanim. He's the hand of them. He was the gabbai tzedakah. He gave out tzedakah, and he was the distributor. So he's like an extension of them. So even if he's giving it to him, maybe it's different because he's really just an extension of, even though here it's two separate people. It's the poor receiving the meiser and Rabbi Akiva receiving the land, but in a certain sense it's all the same because Rabbi Akiva is just a representative of the poor. And therefore this is different. But to take from here that you could do it to literally like two different people where one's not representing the other in any formal way, so maybe that would not work. So we don't have a proof. That question remains up in the air. Does it work for two separate people? Okay, Amar Rava said, Ulo shana ela shenasan demei kulan. That which you can acquire metaltalin along with the land, that's only if you already paid for the metaltalin. You have to have paid for all of it. So you want to you want to buy a let's go with barrels. You want to go with barrels, I guess. You want to buy barrels, and you're gonna give money. Let's say the barrels are sitting on a piece of land somewhere, and they're not here, so you can't make an acquisition on them. But you want to acquire them now, so you give the money, but that doesn't work to acquire the barrels in terms of making them yours. So you give the money, and you're also buying the land that they're sitting on. So through acquiring the land, you can also acquire the barrels. Says Rava, that's only if you paid for all the barrels. But if you didn't pay for them yet, then you won't acquire them along with the land. If you didn't pay for all of the metaltalin, you only acquire that which you paid for, however much you paid for. If you paid half, you can acquire half the barrels. You can only acquire what you've already paid for. That's what Rava says. Says the Gemara, Tanya Kavaseda Rava. We have a brisa that says like Rava. It's a proof to Rava. The brisa says as follows: Yafe koach hakesef mikoach hashtar, b'koach hashtar mikoach hakesef. In one way, kesef, money, is more powerful than a document, and a shtar, a document, is more powerful in another way than kesef, than money. In what ways? So yafe koach hakesef, kesef, money is more powerful, more functional. Shak kesef podin bo ekdeshos u'maiser sheni. You're allowed to use money, cash, specifically. You have to use cash to redeem hektish. If you sanctify something, you dedicate something to the Beis Hamikdash, the temple. So in order to redeem it, you need to give the money. You need to give money to the Beis Hamikdash, and that has to be done with money. You can't do that in another way. You have to give cash. Same thing for Meiser Sheni. Meiser Sheni is the tithe that you bring to Yerushalayim to consume there. But if you don't want to schlep all your produce, you can redeem it for money, and then bring the money and buy food there. So, but it has to be cash, and there's not another way to do it. So that's specific to money. That's the power of kesef. Masha'enkein b'shtar, it doesn't work with the document. V'yafek koach hashtar, and the document is more powerful, more functional than money. Shashtar motzi b'vas Yisrael, you can use a document to divorce a woman. A get is a document. Masha'enkein b'kesef, but you can't use money for that. So in certain ways, money is more functional. You can use it to redeem hektish and meiser sheni. In a certain way, a document is more functional. You can use it to divorce a woman. V'yafek koach shneim mikoach chazaka, v'koach chazaka mikoach shneim. And both of them, both money and a document, are more powerful than a chazaka, an act of ownership that requires mikoach chazaka mikoach shneim. And the other way also, an act of chazaka, of ownership, can be more powerful than money or a document. In what way? Both money and a shtar are more powerful than a chazaka because they can be used to acquire a Jewish slave. But a chazaka can't. As opposed to a chazaka cannot be used to acquire an Eved Ivri, a Jewish slave. It could be used to acquire a Canaanite slave, but not a Jewish slave. And yafeka chazaka, and chazaka, an act of acquisition, an act of that demonstrates ownership, is stronger. Shechazaka, because we find that when it comes to chazaka, if machar lo eser sados be'eser medinos, if somebody sold 10 fields in 10 different countries to another person, once he acquires one of them, he acquires all of them. So that's the so that's the power of chazaka. You acquire one, you can acquire all of them. When it comes to fields, meaning, okay, let's see. It says the Gemara, Bamed Devarim Amurim. When is it true that a chazaka on one field can acquire 10 other fields? Shenasan lo demei kulan. That's only if he already paid for all the other fields. Aval lo nasan lo demei kulan, but if he hasn't yet paid for the other fields, lo kana ela keneging ma'osav. He has only acquired that which he has paid for. So you see, so this is really where we bring our proof to Rava. Rava had said that when you acquire metaltalin alongside land, you only get the metaltalin if you paid for it already. If you haven't paid for it yet, you won't get it alongside the land. So we see that from here. Here, he didn't acquire metaltalin alongside land. He actually was acquiring land alongside land. He was acquiring 9 other fields along with this field. But the Brisa says he only acquires those 9 fields if he's paid for them. Then, when he makes a chazaka, he could acquire those fields also. But otherwise he doesn't. And just like that's true for acquiring fields, it's true for acquiring metaltalin. You have a proof to Rava that until one pays for the items, they cannot be acquired alongside a field, even when you're making a kinyan, an act of acquisition on that field. Just one second, I'm just taking a quick look at Tosfos here. The Gemara had said this in this brisa that Yafa Koach Chazaka. We're supposed to be demonstrating here that Chazaka is stronger than Kesef, is stronger than money, because you make a Chazaka on one, you could acquire, the 9 other fields along with it. So, and then the Gemara says, but it's only if you haven't paid for those fields yet. But if you paid for them, it's only if you have paid for them. If you haven't paid for them, then you can't acquire them. So Tosfos asked a few questions. First, Tosfos asked, well, if you've already paid for them, then why didn't you just acquire them when you paid for them with Kesef? Because Kesef works to acquire a field. So Tosfos says, it's talking about a place where they don't do acquisitions with money. There are places that's how it works. you can't actually acquire with the money, we require a chazaka. So that must be in one of those places. Then he asks, but still, what does it mean that chazaka is stronger than kesef? Here, the chazaka only works if you already gave kesef. If you already paid for it, only then it works. So Tosfos answers, brings a couple answers, but one of them is that it's true if you're buying them, then chazaka doesn't work unless you gave the money. But if you are getting a matana, if you're getting a gift, then it can work without it. So I guess that's how we can understand this brisa. Brisa says chazaka is stronger than kesef because it's possible for chazaka, you can do chazaka on one field and acquire all 10 fields if it's a gift. However, with kesef that won't work. If it's a purchase, that won't work. You have to actually give the money for all 10 of the fields. Just like when you do a chazaka to acquire one field, you could get the 9 other fields only if they've been paid for. So also if you're in a place where you could acquire with money, so you acquire one field with money, you have to pay for all the other 9 fields first before you could acquire them alongside. So that I guess is the pshat in the brisa, one pshat, at least one way to learn, when it says that chazaka is stronger than kesef. In what way is it stronger? It's stronger in that it's possible, if it's a matana, if it's a gift, to acquire 10 fields through just acquiring one. Or doing an active acquisition on one, you could acquire the 9 others along with it. As opposed to with money, you actually have to give money for all 10 of the fields. Okay, we will hold here. The Gemara is actually going to continue to elaborate on this brisa. We will, Mir Hashem, do that next time.